Welcome to part 2 of my attempt to cut through the noise of the first intense weeks of the Trump administration. As I explained in my previous video, this intensity is a deliberate strategy to, quote, flood the zone with so much raw stuff that you can't focus or make sense of it all. But buried in that flood are actions that could, if we don't note them or respond, could permanently damage the republic. Last time I talked about how the pardoning of the January 6th thugs was the final step in setting up a system of promoting and protecting political violence, in this case, in the service of Trump, but that could really be used by anybody going forward. This time, I want to focus on a different, concrete danger to our democracy: the potential abuse of the Justice Department, the FBI, and other governmental operations to punish so-called political enemies. See, normally in small d democratic politics, we're not supposed to have domestic enemies. Enemies are what we call non-Americans, other people who threaten us. Inside the U.S., we're supposed to be so-called opponents because, we're all Americans. Sure, we oppose one another, but we're not enemies. But with Trump, that doesn't appear to be true anymore. He has made it quite clear over the last few years, and especially during the campaign, that he's out to settle scores. He's on a revenge tour and has often suggested that he'll use every governmental tool at his disposal to punish those who opposed or blocked him in the past, or that currently oppose or even just disagree with him. Since getting elected, he has definitely not made a point of backing away from those sentiments. Let me lay out a bit more background here. See, there's a structural problem in the U.S. government. The federal government has a lot of different investigation and police agencies, from the Border Patrol to the national parks, the DEA, the ATF, and the big bad boy on the block, the FBI. All of these agencies ultimately report to the president. More specifically, the boss of the FBI reports to the Attorney General. The Attorney General runs the Justice Department and is the federal government's top lawyer, responsible for bringing cases when laws are broken. The boss of the Attorney General is the president. The Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the president, as the phrase goes. In other words, the president can fire the AG at any time. Can you see the problem? Suppose the president orders the Attorney General to go after his perceived enemies, fairly or unfairly, whether a law was broken or not, to bring the full weight of the federal government's investigatory powers and legal powers down on someone. Well, that AG has to do it, or quit, or get fired. Now, by custom, just custom, nothing formal, just the way it's been done, presidents have set general guidelines for AGs, but generally steered clear of getting deeply involved in specific cases. But that's merely a norm, that justice is supposed to be meted out fairly and impartially, not for personal political reasons. There is nothing officially on the books to stop a president who says, screw that, the AG works for me. I want this case against this guy, go do it. If the AG is willing to go along, woe unto the targets. Now, as I mentioned, Trump has said a lot of things. We'll see what Trump does. But this is the clear and present danger. Trump has made his political career off of flouting traditions, and he's pissed at what he calls his enemies. And thanks to January 6th, we know that he's okay with what we'll call extreme politics. If he thoroughly politicizes the Justice Department, if he tosses out the tradition of Justice Department independence, all in service of himself and his personal agenda, that precedent will now be set in our political culture. Maybe it'll all work out under Trump, but there's always the next guy. That danger is real. Now, I can already hear the conservative howls. The Biden administration targeted Trump. That was the real persecution. They started it. And what about all of those state cases, too? It's lawfare, as it sometimes is called. Lawfare, warfare, get it? Look, I get it. Believe me, I thought a couple of the cases were useless and or counterproductive. Specifically, the lame New York case about campaign finance violations involving a porn star, and also the classified documents case. I won't go into why just now. But the other two cases were different. There were two cases, the federal one under Jack Smith and the Georgia case. As I've tried to make clear in my previous videos, the efforts to overturn the 2020 election and the attack on the Capitol strike at the heart of our democratic system. These were the only two cases that mattered and could have a lasting impact on the republic. In the federal one, the Biden administration dragged its feet for 2 years before putting any effort into investigating Trump and his accomplices. And on top of that, they seemed to only really move once Trump had made it clear he was going to run for re-election. I mean, sheesh. The merits of the case were good, but what a lousy approach. As for the Georgia one, look, we've got Trump clearly on a recording trying to get election officials there to falsify the election results, yet that prosecution is stalled because the prosecutor couldn't keep it in her pants. The question now is, how will Trump respond since he's back in office? Will he act on his belief that he's justified in using federal law enforcement and other governmental powers to punish his perceived enemies? Or will he take a more traditional approach? What he decides will set the future trajectory of the republic. Another facet of the long-term danger that I want to emphasize here is that it could all become so highly personalized. He'll go after the people who wronged him, not the country, not the Constitution, him. He'll use the law and the vast powers of the government investigative and prosecutorial power in service of one man, himself. Let me be clear about this. If you please Trump, if you butter him up, you'll be left alone. Cross him, and you're in the crosshairs. Do you ever remember seeing those statues about justice being blind? There's a reason for that. Justice isn't supposed to know who you are, really. It's not supposed to care who you are. It's about the law, but possibly not anymore. By the way, investigations alone are enough to upend people's lives. They can disrupt lives and bankrupt people as they defend themselves. Also, it's a genuine worry that other government functions could be put to use, including interfering with renewing passports, getting audited by the IRS, and so on. Another example is how Trump has threatened to use the powers of the FCC to harass and or punish news outlets that he doesn't like the coverage of. And he's already used his power to put perceived domestic enemies in genuine danger, like Anthony Fauci and John Bolton, by removing their federally sponsored security protection, callously saying when asked about it that, well, life is filled with risk. Unlike the pardons, what will happen here mostly remains to be seen. But if Trump goes through with the thorough politicization of the Justice Department and other federal functions, all in service of one man, well, then the republic has crossed into a new and dangerous place, one that will serve as a model for the future, and not a good one. Good luck, America.